I am so honored to be able to introduce Dr. Judith Sayers. Dr. Sayers is the president of the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council, where she has served since 2017 and was recently appointed as chancellor at Vancouver Island University. She also teaches at the Peter Gustafson School of Business, my apologies if I didn't pronounce that right, School of Business and Environmental Studies at the University of Victoria as an adjunct professor. A member of Hupechaset First Nation. Hopefully I didn't butcher that, Dr. Sayers. Dr. Sayers was the chief for 14 years and also acted as the chief negotiator for a community during the BC Treaty process. She is a mother of two, has an educational background in business and law, and has received an honorary doctorate of laws from Queen's University. Dr. Sayers joins economic development and capacity with environmental conservation measures and has led innovation and award-winning projects. She continuously has established that alternative energies can be developed in line with First Nations, and we are thrilled that she will be sharing wisdom with us as our communities implement the Historic Pathways Forward Agreement 2.0. Sorry to say, we got another rock star here, people. So please put your virtual hands together and welcome Dr. Judith Sayers to the stage. Thank you, Dr. Sayers.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you for that enthusiastic introduction. And it's great to see you, Mina. And I imagine all 95 of you sitting together, in one of your community centers and getting together. It's a nice thought, that we could all be sitting and listening to singing and drumming and doing things in a traditional way. I really, really miss that right now. But we're making the most of this technology, this Zoom, and we've actually been doing a lot of business. I probably have more meetings now with more time, with no traveling to do it. So it is an honor and a privilege to speak with you all, to share a little bit of what Nuu-chah-nulth are doing here on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And it's a balmy 5 degrees here and on the island and no snow. And it's been an exceptionally warm winter. And, climate change is definitely upon us and something that we really need to address as part of our governance structure. We're not going to have much to govern. The Nuu-chah-nulth, just to give you a bit of background, the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council represents 14 First Nations on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Pachi-Dot around Port Renfrew is Nuu-chah-nulth, but they don't work in our tribal council. We do work with them. And of course, we have the Makah in Washington State. So we're, divided by a boundary. We have 5 nations, the Manuth, who have signed a final agreement. And we have one First Nation that has a 10-year grant. And the other 8 were all ARFA agreements. And of course, we get tribal council funding for all 14. We have a political arm, of course, of which myself and Mariah Charlson are president and vice president. We have 2 women, and our executive director is women. Bit of a change, and it's nice. All our directors are all male, so we have a nice balance, and I really enjoy the work that I do. We also provide services and fisheries, education, employment and training, counseling. We have an exciting arm of cultural support that provide all kinds of cultural support for families, for counseling, then work with our homeless and work with the police in a cultural way. And it's a really nice balance to what we do in our other areas. And of course, we do capital and housing, infrastructure, newspaper. We have a delegated agency for children and family. Now, when you talk about governance, that's something that we're trying to work out. So you know that there's new federal laws and really that we can draft our own laws in children and families. So does our delegated agency, whose of course authority comes from the province, goes off on our own, do we then, as First Nations, delegate our authority to them to carry it out? Does each First Nation do their own? These are things that we're grappling with and trying to figure how that will all work out. And of course, we have agreements with MCFD to provide services to our children who live away from home. And so we have authority over that as well. So it's an interesting time to work on our governance collectively as Nuu-chah-nulth and individually as First Nations. Now, I know part of your agreements work on economic development. At our tribal council level, we don't do any of the economic development. That's done by the individual First Nations. Some of them have come together to provide economic development collectively. And so, there's the Nuu-chah-nulth Seafoods, Hayu Fisheries, Huu-ay-aht First Nation has some partnerships within Tree Farm License 44. So there's a combination of individual and collective economic development. So our role at the Tribal Council is not to do economic development. We don't do consultations on land and resources. Where we do step in, though, of course, is in such things as federal and provincial laws or policies. And we are doing that now as we speak. One of the big things, of course, in Nuu-chah-nulth here on the ocean is that 10 years ago, 5 of our nations won a court case, well, it's more like 11 years, that said that they have a right to the commercial fishery. And the court says, please, fisheries, DFO, and First Nations, work out what that means. And after 6 years, there was no agreement as to what that meant. So these 5 nations went back to court to get a ruling that DFO was infringing on our rights. And 2 years ago, the Court of Appeal heard the appeal, and we have no decision. If you can imagine, the courts, 2 years to make a decision. And meanwhile, in the past 11 years, our fishermen have been sitting on the shore and not able to go out and do their commercial fisheries. They've done some, but not as was imagined by the courts. And fisheries has been a core activity and a resource for our members to create income for their families. So this has been a real struggle for us. We watched the Mi'kmaq this summer doing the same thing, trying to exercise their right to their lobster fishery because DFO wouldn't sit down, even though they also had a court case on their side. So this is a huge impediment for us out here. And many, many times our fishermen just said, we're just gonna go out and do it. And our lawyers say, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. But I think people are at the point now where they just want to go out and assert the rights that the court set out for them, because this really is something that affects us economically. And so we originally started this court case with 14 First Nations. And of course, the federal government loves to play divide and conquer, and got a ruling from the court that if we couldn't resolve our overlaps, we had to step out of the court case. So we ended up with 5 nations in this court case that won the ruling back in 2010 and went back to the Court of Appeal. So we continue to do that. There are things we work on collectively to try and increase economic development in our territories. Clean energy is something I've worked on in a long time, and we have 11 of our Nuu-chah-nulth nations that have operating projects or want operating projects. And of course, right now, the BC government isn't buying any power, doesn't want us to create any more power. They say Site C is going to give them more than enough power. And there were millions of dollars, not just by Nuu-chah-nulth nations, but others, of people who were developing projects and then were stopped in their tracks. So this continues to be a big political push for myself in trying to develop more clean energy, provide opportunities. And, the most recent thing that I'm working on is First Nations utilities. So you could put together a utility that could provide power for your region. And right now, of course, BC Hydro and Fortis do that, and they don't want us interfering with their customer base. So anyway, it continues to be a big push in economic development. The government loves to put up barriers. for some of the things that we feel we can do in a way that sustains our environment, high environmental standards. And it's really important that we be able to own, manage, use our own resources in our own territory. I wanted to touch a little bit about how do we govern during a pandemic and what has become some of the main issues on how we can govern collectively as a Nuu-chah-nulth. And of course, COVID has impacted our communities immensely. And so we came together in June and came up with 4 things that we wanted from the provincial government. Simple things. One, we wanted to know all of the COVID cases in close communities because we all go into town, to buy groceries, drugstore, gas, etc. We wanted to know how many cases were in them. And of course, we were told individual information was more important than um, information coming to the communities. And we said, well, we are nations and we have a nation-to-nation relationship with BC. And therefore, we want this information. We need the full disclosure of information so we can govern in our communities. We fought them in the media, we fought them at the table, and we set up a table with BC to negotiate. And we took a case before the Privacy Commissioner to determine and say that we have a right to the information as nations, and we have it's more important for a group of people who can be more affected. And we lost that application. The Privacy Commissioner basically said that there's no tools in BC law for us to be given this right, and that there was enough information for us publicly. So it was a real blow to us. And the Privacy Commissioner is very clear that the health system in British Columbia has to be changed. And I think all of us recognize this. And so how do we, from our positions, change this? And one of the things I worked with BC and still working with them is how do we use joint decision-making to do this? Just wanted to let you know that we did come to an agreement with BC on sharing information. So we are not allowed to use it publicly, but we can use the information to determine if our citizens should go like into Tofino or into Port Alberni or Nanaimo. And so we can say, well, Port Alberni is a red zone, don't go there because there's too many cases. There's a few conditions on that. We're just in the process of signing that agreement. Not what we wanted, but sometimes negotiations don't give you what you want. So that brings me to this whole right of self-government and self-determination. And it's something that we as First Nations have always said many years ago when I was young. I used to go to the United Nations in the early years before they even started drafting the declaration. So it was like 1983. And one of the things that we said from the beginning with all Indigenous people across the world is that we had to have the right of self-determination put in the declaration. It was basic. Everything fell upon that. And of course, the Universal Declaration does give us the right to self-determination, but they also qualify it in Section 4 by saying, well, it has to be internal. We're not allowed to become full governing states and leave Canada and be on our own. And Section 46 of UNDRIP also says this, that you can't dismember Canada. But I always think, many of the countries that have gone off on their own, Vanuatu, South Africa, etc., they didn't need a law to let them do that. I mean, if we eventually want to leave Canada, I'm sure that we'll leave Canada. But in the meantime, I don't know if anybody wants to do that. But in the meantime, we have the right of self-determination. And to me, self-determination is determining how we want to govern ourselves, step by step by step. I mean, if the Indian Act was gone tomorrow, could we govern ourselves? But it's just a matter of deciding what is those steps. And, we're at one end of the spectrum where many of us are still under the Indian Act. And we have First Nations that have their own self-govern agreements. We have First Nations that have um, final agreements that they're governed by. And it's up to us to decide how quickly we do that and how we do that. And we have to be able to have all our people ready to move on self-determination as we go. And I've seen many First Nations, take one area of jurisdiction, such as education or child welfare, and start developing that and getting the tools they need to determine themselves. And sorry, and that's been how they've operated, is just grabbing one area and having it fully governable by yourself because you've built up the capacity to do so. So many of our communities would be able to, and still do, manage fisheries. And that's how we do it. So this new interesting opportunity that we have that's come up, and it'll be my last comments because I know time is up for me, is that we have the new Declaration of Indigenous Rights Act. I call it DRIPA for BC, and the federal government has now tabled Bill C-15, which is the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People Act. And both of them adopt the UNDRIP, which allows for the right of self-determination. And I often wonder, how well does governments understand what the right of self-determination is? What is there? I mean, for them, is it just the Indian Act? So for us, this is our opportunity to put before the government our governance structure, where we want to go, how we're going to get there, and they should support us. It's a new tool, and will it help us? I think it depends on how well organized we are, how we support one another, and how prepared we are. I mean, if we went to the government and said, okay, we want the right of self-determination, what should we do? That's absolutely wrong. You don't tell them. They don't tell us, we tell them what we want in the way of self-determination. And this is in every area of our lives, from education to children, families, to mental health, physical health, how we manage our lands, how we stop projects in our territory. Um, all of that is encompassed in the right of self-determination, our right to the free, prior, and informed consent before any development in our territories that could destroy our lands and territories and our ability to exercise our rights. And I'm looking forward to, I've been working with our Nuu-chah-nulth nations on how we can do that individually and collectively, because it is up to First Nations to be governing themselves, the tribal councils, the political support, and providing. It won't be a national government, it will be the individual governments that will do so, and the treaty nations will build on what they have in their treaties, and when they need to amend their treaty, they will do so. And so I'm looking forward to this new era, and I think as we've lived our experiences through the years, and even just through this pandemic and our lack of ability to govern our own health, and climate change, and putting together our plans for forest fires, for climate change. There's so many things that we just have to take control of and do what we need to do without asking for the governmental permission. And that's our right of self-determination. And I know you're working hard at doing that with all your different agreements. And that's great to see, the step-by-step pathways that you've done, and just moving forward in the way that you see fit. And it's good to get ideas from other governments and other First Nations in different parts of um, BC, Canada, the world, and see what's going on out there. There's a real recognition, and I go back to the days when I first got out of law school and went off into the world, and we're trying to get publicity on certain issues, and nobody would listen to us. Our issues weren't important. Today they are. And we have to make them more important. We have to make them election issues. We have to continue to educate people to try and eradicate racism, because that's a big block to our progress. And there's so many things to do and no lack of challenges. And, I applaud all the work that you're doing and where you're going for your people, because this is what it's all about. I was just on a call with the community this morning for 4 hours, and we talked about vaccinations for off-reserve people. And that distinction doesn't belong to us. Our people are our people no matter where they live, and they're the most important thing for us. And so, how do we keep moving, educating our children, letting them take over these roles? The world has changed, and we change too, but we have those basic values that are so important to us. Anyway, I probably talked too long, but I just did really appreciate the opportunity to think about what I could talk to you about, what I could share with you, and working together to promote our self-determination, self-government in the various areas, supporting one another is so important. And so I appreciate the opportunity to network with you today and to share some of my thoughts. Clayco, Clayco.
Must see. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your words. Judith, always wonderful to see you. Love running into you when we used to be able to gather. A couple selfies of us. I think Terry TG was photobombing us in one of them. But thank you for sharing with us where you're at. I think if you're open or open to the idea, I'd love to have a follow-up with you, and maybe we can do some kind of, I'm totally into webinars now. We can talk, share stories, and have members just join the conversation and kind of listen to what we're all doing, because it's really important to share with each other what the kind of work we're doing and learning from each other. Like this whole, all of these series of agreements that have been accomplished through the Tribal Council. A lot of props to my predecessors, particularly Deputy Chief Reg Mueller, who was here for about a year and a half. I forget, and then Tribal Chief Terry TG. These agreements really, a lot of the great work was done during their term, and came in towards the end, just had to push it over the line. That was about it. So really just want to honor all of the leaders who have done so much wonderful work for all of our community, particularly you, Judith, and I've always been a huge admirer of yours. And definitely, if you are available for some webinar stuff, I'd love to do that. It could be more conversation about what's happening there and over here. Any questions? Oh, sorry, Chair. I'm not chairing.
Not a problem, my friend. You were doing great. If you want to address there's some questions and answers in the box, and then we'll call on Lisa TG. She's had her hand up, and then we will be taking about a 5-minute break to slide in and get us organized for resolution. So we'll be doing some more draws and playing another staff video. So just so everybody knows what's happening.
Thank you. So I'll start with Ann Ketlow. She has 2 questions, but I'll put them into one, Judith. For Judith, early Nakazi run is nearly extinct and is in serious danger. Further, we are at the headwaters and are always the one who make the sacrifice to the salmon, so the salmon can make it to the spawning grounds. Our people go without for so many years, and it is main staple of our diet. Judith, is there an opportunity for an agreement with those nations to gather on the Fraser Run?
Yes, I believe so. So some of our First Nations are the Fraser Run, and a lot of them are on the other side. But some of the things that we're doing to revive the fisheries is doing of course, the restoration, rehabilitation in our territories. We have our northern nations are working on salmon managed forest areas. So we want to create new areas in forest planning that allow for us to restore the salmon habitat, because they've logged to the streams and the salmon aren't coming back. So we're working on that, and we're also working with West Coast Environmental Law to document our traditional laws of how we manage our resources. In fact, one of our nations, our hereditary chiefs, they had certain streams that were just theirs. And so going back to some of those management practices and remembering what they are is something that we're doing importantly. But I think we do need to get together to talk about how do we preserve, protect, restore all these runs to what they used to be, because it really isn't fair that you're at the end of the line and you're not getting the fish.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's definitely a follow-up, I think, for both you and I to look at how the communities can work together. Have some kind of webinar coming up. Another question, Terry Lugie. I think it's our role as Indigenous people to steward resources on our territories. What is your perspective on balancing commercial, fisheries, and stewardship?
Well, I think it's important that, you know, we live with ensuring that there will always be fish for 7 generations to come, that our great, great, great grandchildren are going to know what salmon are, and that we have to live to high principles, you know, according to Canadian law, which isn't our law, but, you know, we're second only to conservation. And what the AGA case says is that we are second only to conservation, and that includes a commercial fishery. So I think our allocations come first, and we should ensure that we have enough, but also working with the sports and recreational fishery to make the commercial fishery to make sure that there is enough fish left to meet the runs that we need, the spawning. So I think there has to definitely be a balance, and I think we need to drive that agenda, because as we know, fisheries just wants to make sure the commercial fishermen and the sports fishery create the commerce and economics that they need. So we need to play a larger role, and I think we've come a long ways down that road.
Okay, thank you. I know, Zandra, did you want to pause here, or do you want to do a couple more questions, or?
I would say let's keep rolling on, and then we can wrap this up, and then we'll take our break. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Judith, what are your thoughts on BC First Nations to unify as one? Knowing majority of BC First Nations never signed treaty, and BC First Nations would be a game changer of the future regarding our quality of life, economics, etc. So it's about the unifying First Nations, and I think you probably have a number of experience that, particularly around the BCFN, etc., and other work that you've been doing.
I think that we do need to unify politically and set the agenda of what needs to be done. And I think, you know, we could lead in various areas. You know, those that are involved in clean energy could lead that. Those that are involved in fisheries could lead that. But I think the more collective, unified voice we have, the better off we are with working with British Columbia and Canada. And now, you know, with the DRIPA legislation in BC and UNDRIP federally, you know, we're the ones that are going to say what the priority work needs to be done, you know, and all of us would have different legislations. And so how do we come together to find out where do we put our energy first? What are those priorities? And so we should determine that agenda together collectively and not work against one another. And I think we can become a lot stronger that way.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent.
That's it.
I think we've hit all of our, and I noticed our hand came down. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Dr. Sayers, for doing all the work that you do. You not to, you know, you've really been a groundbreaker in our nations, and we thank you for that. And it's not for you to have, you know, undue, you know, to feel humble or anything. It's just really you have helped. The work you're doing has helped guide so many of our leaders in their forward path for our community. So for all of our children, our grandchildren, our 7 generations, we just want to hold our hands up to you and say thank you so much for all of the contributions that you've made, you continue to make, and you will make in the future.
Clayco, thank you for that. Nice to see you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sayers. Have a great day.
You too.
All right.